Hello, everybody, and welcome to this second session of our second round of Spark's Open Access 101 series. I'm Nick Shockey, Spark's Associate Executive Director, and it's been great to see so much interest in this series overall and in today's session in particular. I know that addressing concerns about quote-unquote predatory publishers is a frequent issue across academic and research libraries of all types, shapes, and sizes. I think at campus events where I've spoken, sort of this issue would be among the front runners for like the center of the bingo card of like most frequently raised questions, particularly by faculty in the Q&A afterwards. So, even for those that are really well versed in this topic and experienced in answering these kinds of questions, I suspect today's session will still be helpful in exploring different ways to address this concern and to reframe this discussion to a broader one that invites a follow-up conversation about the kinds of open systems that we want to be central to scholarly communication, to academic publishing, moving forward. So, to that end, we hope today's session, like the others in this series, will be really helpful, sort of lightweight professional development for folks across all different areas, in libraries. As we start today's session, I would like to again invite folks to just briefly introduce themselves in the chat, by sharing your name, institution, anything else that you'd like. And it would be great for folks to stay active in the chat throughout today's session, and even just like reactions to others' comments or things that Matt and Teresa or Maria are sharing would be great. I know we've talked about reactions before, but not had that functionality properly turned on. It should be turned on now, so hopefully folks can react. We would love also for folks to share your own experiences related to this topic in the chat, or potentially to come off mute in the Q&A section to do so. So I'd love those contributions in the chat. For questions specifically, it would be ideal if folks could use the Q&A functionality in Zoom that just helps us keep track of questions, also allows you to respond to questions that other folks have asked, upvote them, or ask them anonymously too, if you'd like. We are recording today's session, so just be aware of that, particularly if coming off of mute to ask a question during the Q&A. And finally, I just want to, again, recognize how fortunate we at Spark are to have wonderful collaborators in Josh Bolek, Maria Bond, and Will Cross in helping us to organize this second round of the Open Access 101 series and giving us such a strong foundation in the first round at the end of or last year that Josh, Maria, and Will also led the organization of. So really appreciate the three of them for making this series possible and allowing us to sort of build on such a strong foundation in the Scholarly Communications Notebook and the volume that they edited for ACRL that touches on many of these topics. So with that, I will turn things over to Maria Bond to help open today's event and to introduce our fantastic speakers for this topic, Teresa Schultz from the University of Nevada, Reno, and Matt Ruen from Grand Valley State University. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, let me start with thanks to Nick for the introduction, and really for Nick's leadership and Spark's leadership in helping us all to stay engaged with and educated about so many important issues in scholarly communication, including this one. As Nick said, this is our, let me do the math, fifth session, I think, and every one of them has been extremely well registered. One had almost 1,000 people registered, and even more gratifying, extremely well attended. Not all 1,000 show up, but a lot of people do. Everyone has drawn a crowd, and I think that just speaks to the need that our community really feels like these are hard issues to keep up with and hard issues to address, and it is so comforting to talk with colleagues and to know that we are part of a community addressing these issues. So thank you for that. So today we'll be talking about problematizing predatory publishing. Problematizing indeed. In the volume that Josh and Will and I edited, Scholarly Communication, Librarianship, and Open Knowledge. Look, I happen to have a copy on my desk. Amy Buckland edited a great section on open access, which cleverly embedded a number of open access pieces in it and then built apparatus around those. One of the pieces she used was from Samuel Moore's block, and it was a piece called The Undecidable Nature of Predatory Publishing. It's online, it's free, you should read it. It's a great blog post. But just very briefly, he starts out saying, the term predatory publisher reveals a limit of language, or rather it asks too much of language. It seeks a binary separation between predatory and non-predatory, where no such separation can exist, ultimately demonstrating more about the motivations and hidden biases of the accuser than the supposedly predatory journal at hand. We therefore need another way to conceptualize the practices that predatory publishing seeks to describe. Yeah, it's pretty problematic and inherently problematized. As one of my scholarly communication students once said caustically, is there any publishing that's not predatory? Come on. We've been talking about commercial publishing. So yes, these are tricky waters. And today we have two expert and really invested guides to help us navigate those waters. Teresa Schultz and Matt Ruen. Teresa and Matt are the founding editors of Reviews, the Journal of Journal Reviews. And you stop me if I say that wrong. I was practicing and I kept slipping on. I don't know if this is common or if this is just my speech pattern, which publishes reviews that assess journals for quality and applicability to research aims. The review aims to, and this is from their About page, to improve the discourse about the quality of scholarly journals by encouraging nuanced, contextual evaluation of scholarly journals, and to give librarians and others an outlet to share work they've conducted evaluating scholarly journals. And really read the About page. It's a good one. I was settling down with it yesterday. I was like, this is a good read. So I'm going to turn that over to those guides, and let me just tell you a little bit about them. Teresa Schultz is the Scholarly Communication and Social Sciences Librarian at the University of Nevada, Reno. She has researched various aspects of scholarly communication, and it was her irritation at the proliferation of open access equals predatory that pushed her to help co-found Reviews, the Journal of Journal Reviews. She earned her MLS from Indiana University, Indianapolis. And Matt is the head of collections and digital scholarship at Grand Valley State University Library. And if you were part of the group that came in early, you'll have heard this is relatively new position, but almost a year old. And that's just outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He received his MLIS and a master's in archival studies from the University of British Columbia. And he joined Grand Valley in late 2014, where he was the Open Education and Scholarly Communication Librarian, advocating and supporting open access, OER, and library publishing. And he tells me that his journey to today's conversation began long ago, in the days before COVID, remember then, and the fall of Twitter, with some needlessly strong opinions, these are his words, on how we understand predatory publishing. Opinions which eventually led him to team up with Teresa and several other excellent people to found the review. Let me get it right now. Reviews, the Journal of Journal Reviews. So I'm very eager to hear their perspective on predatory publishing and really eager to hear the conversation that ensues with all of you. Thank you. And I think Teresa will be taking the lead, right?
Yes, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So yes, I'm Teresa, and I'm going to be talking with Matt today about our views on this idea of predatory publishing and what it means and what it should mean. I do want to give a shout out because it was not just the two of us who founded our journal. We did have the wonderful collaboration of Joshua Neds Fox from Wayne State University, Brianne Silman from University of Winnipeg, Layla Sturman, Montana State University, and Stephanie Towery at Texas State University. It's really been a team effort. They remain on the editorial board, but we are now the leaders of it. And yeah, so we're going to talk. I do want to get things started. We have a little bit of an interactive feature, and we have a Google form poll. I know it's not a Menti poll. They're cracking down on the free version. So you can go to I put the URL up there. Hopefully this should work. I just realized I haven't tested it recently. Please let me know if it doesn't. But also the QR code. And I'll leave this up here for a moment, put it in chat if these are not working, and I'll quickly go and fix it. But otherwise, while you all go, this is a 2-question poll. First of all, we're interested to see how you all define predatory publishing, if at all. If you're totally new to the concept, just put in what you think it means. But if you are more, oh, thank you, Nick. If you are more familiar with it, we would love to know what you think, what it means to you, because one of our biggest issue probably with predatory publishing is there's not really agreed upon concept of what it means. And while I'll go do this poll, I'm going to tell a short story about an incident we've had here at my university. So the first question is, how would you define predatory publishing? And then the second question is, how big of an issue would you say this is on your campus? We're kind of interested in getting a feel for this. Up until about last year, I would have said this was there was rumblings on my campus about predatory publishing from some specific colleges and departments, but it wasn't a very big thing. And then we had something happen where a university level administrator who had been a recent hire was kind of caught. Someone started digging through this person's CV, and quite a number of their journal articles they were claiming on their CV looked a little suspicious, a little sus, if you will. And they were all coming from various journals with this one publisher. And it was technically kind of an open access publisher. I actually dispute if it was open access, because while it was free to read, they were not Creative Commons licensed. So I would argue it's not truly open. But there was a perception that they were open. There was an APC, article processing charge, which we'll dive into more if you're not familiar. And basically, it didn't even take someone in the discipline to realize a lot of the articles something was not right with them. There were some pretty blatant red flags. They were super short. We're talking like 1 to 3 pages long. Review time, which the journal actually posted, was sometimes as short as 3 days. Maybe one of the biggest red flags, some of the journal articles actually included crown drawings for their visuals. They actually had crown drawings going on. And it caused a big uproar at my institution. And we're still seeing some lasting effects from it. But a lot of the people were like, this is a predatory open access publisher. And I dispute that, because I would say, you know what? If you people did digging, and not just were all these articles with journals from one publisher that was looking very suspicious. This university administrator, it was actually uncovered, owned the publishing company of the journals. This was a vanity press is what it was, which is another concept that's been around in scholarly communications for a bit, and is nothing really to do with open access. There have been vanity for-profit paywall journals as well. And so this is just kind of something that I try and bring up, just because there are lots of predatory practices that we see by scholarly publishers. It is not just the APC. I think the APC is a big problem, and we can talk about that. But even with the APC, in some ways it's been legitimized, but only if it's by the right publishers, right? So we're going to be diving into this. And so now I want to go see the results. Okay, we've gotten lots of results, so I probably won't be able to go through all of them. I'm actually going to do the second question first. How much of a concern is it at your institution? People occasionally talk about it. Looks like is the pretty biggest 63%, followed by grumblings are persistent. So not many people are choosing not at all, or it's a full-on panic. So we're falling on the in-between part of the spectrum, which actually will relate a lot to what Matt and I are going to say. I'll just kind of go through some of the ones I see. Matt, I don't know if you want to highlight any in chat that you see as well. Practice in which profit is prioritized above meeting needs of authors and readers. Those who try and persuade researchers to publish in low quality or unknown journals, that's interesting. Don't do peer review. Publishers that tend to be quality and peer reviewed, but not credible and is hoping to make money off of various researchers. I'll just scroll down a bit. Horrible. Okay, that works as a definition too. Practices that don't align with standard scholarly publishing practices. Oh, but that's an interesting one because what's standard practices and how do we define that? Profiteers who have little regard to research integrity. And really kind of part of what we wanted to highlight with this is there is a broad definition as to what is predatory publishing. So if you actually go and look at the scholarly literature on what is predatory publishing, there's not really there's no more agreement in the literature than there is in the Google form that we just had you all fill out. I like to cite this one article. It is getting a little bit old, it's 2018, but I think it's still really relevant. This was a scoping review done by Kobe et al. And the way I summarize their findings is, who knows? It's a very short, very brief, who knows? Basically what they did was they tried to go out and find all the articles on predatory publishing, and they looked at how did each of those articles define predatory publishing. And then they looked at each of the definitions and they broke it down into characteristics of the definition. And all told, they found 108 unique characteristics with clear contrast, meaning that some of these 108 different elements, which that's a lot of different elements to try and work into a definition, they actually contradicted with each other. So some of these definitions of predatory publishing were straight up conflicting with each other. A lot of the authors from that same article went on to kind of go do like a Delphi type study where they try to bring in a whole bunch of experts to come up with their own definition of predatory publishing. And so we're just kind of work from that. Although I still don't know if I would say that this has been a commonly accepted definition either, but it's an interesting one to work with. And so they defined predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and/or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. Now then, one really interesting thing to me I appreciate about this definition is nowhere in the definition do you see the word open access. And yet, in a lot of people's mind, predatory publishing equals open access journals. And there is a reason for this, and that reason's name is Jeffrey Beal. If you're not familiar with Jeffrey Beal, we will be talking about him frequently today. More than I would like to, but it's someone we have to talk about. But basically, he is the one who coined the term predatory publishing, at least in relation to open access journals. And the whole idea is that, when open access came around, we actually have APCs in the very early days of open access. The whole idea was it was free to read, free to publish, free. But, scholarly communications, there is cost involved. It is not a totally free endeavor, even though the internet does make it cheaper than print. And so when you had journals like PLOS ONE start to charge a publishing fee, or now known as the article processing charge, other journals started to adopt it, other open access journals. And there was some really big backlash to the APC in the early days of it. A lot of people, to them, paying to publish was automatically predatory, and there was no way it could ever be legitimate. And Jeffrey Beal, who was a librarian at the time at University of Colorado, I believe, he basically coined the term. He said that this is predatory publishing, and he started his own list. And really, there were stings that were done. People would specifically try to send junk articles to open access journals and try to see if they would be accepted, and then they would be determined predatory. But if we go and look at this definition, again, it doesn't actually mention open access, which we do appreciate. But if you look at some of the components of this definition, prioritizing self-interest, characterized by false or misleading information, lack of transparency. Matt and I are going to argue that this can apply to a lot of other practices than just a publishing fee. There are many different predatory practices that we have identified, we and many others have identified in scholarly journals and publishers. Certainly the traditional, I guess now, method of dealing with predatory publishing, because we don't want to dismiss publishing fees, they certainly can be a problem, is this idea of lists, journal lists, good and bad lists. There's been other names for them. Matt and I like to call them watch list and safe list. And the idea of the watch list, that's really what Beale's list was. Beale started a list of bad journals, basically. These are predatory journals for publishers. These are journals to avoid. He has since retired. His list has been archived. Some people kind of have tried to been maintaining it, although they won't name who they are. There's no transparency. You will hear Matt and I talk about how we think transparency is very important in scholarly publishing, so we're concerned about the lack of transparency. But then there's a for-profit company, Cabela's, who has kind of uptaken this. You can pay to access their watch list, but obviously having to pay to access a list presents problems. So some people have turned to what they called safe lists. Okay, we're not going to label journals bad, but we do want to have some journals we know we can trust. And so they've actually taken other lists that weren't really created for this purpose. So there's the Directory of Open Access Journals, and there's the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, so their member list. Some people will see this as a good quality indicator. But even with that, there's problems because honestly, that's not what they were made for. They're not really trying to be arbiters of quality. And as you can see from this quote here, any attempt to create a list of this nature will be incomplete and out of date from the moment it is published. Another thing that Matt and I really believe in is that scholarly publishing is very, it's growing, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a growing organism, basically. It's always constantly evolving and changing. And so what maybe a publisher was doing some practices that raised eyebrows, but then maybe they changed their ways. So how do we account for those practices? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt now.
All right, so this is the part where I provide a nice, easy explanation that ties everything up into like a neat little bow and we can all go home. Or, the other thing. So as Teresa described, as Maria introduced, when we talk about predatory publishing, the definitions that we're using, the way we understand that problem, once you start looking at the pieces of that definition, everything gets messy. And so we're going to get a little bit messy. Next slide, Teresa. Okay. Before we get too messy, I want to start out by acknowledging, noting, caveating the problem of predatory or scam journals or websites that call themselves the Journal of Very Important International Studies and don't actually do peer review. It is a real problem. There are plenty of websites out there that are quite happy to take advantage of authors who want to get something published and are happy to pay for a guaranteed result. But I think one of the the core frustration that led Teresa and I and our collaborators to start working on this project is that the way that we talk about this real problem obscures a lot of the complications, obscures a lot of the ways that characteristics we describe as predatory in the context of predatory open access publishers extend a lot farther than the specific publishers on any given list or targeted in any given sting operation. So going to start complicating the problem by complicating the idea of predatory. Next slide, please. One of the big kind of consistent themes in discussions of predatory publishing is the idea that predatory publishing is predatory because it is exploitative, because it is taking advantage of authors, of academia in general, for profit, for self-interest, to enrich the scammer, enrich the predator. But if we're talking about financial exploitation, that extends a whole lot farther than individual dubious or scam journal web pages. With APCs, we see an enormous range that doesn't always in my opinion, doesn't often seem to have a lot of bearing on the actual costs of production for a given article. So these observations, almost all of them, except for the last one, are things that I've observed in applications to Grand Valley's Open Access Fund, the funding that we have set up to kind of help cover APC's, article processing charges. And so I review those, review those applications, and the predatory or the dubious, the journals that have enough red flags where I ask the faculty member, are you sure you want to publish here? Those tend to have pretty small APCs, the $100, $200, $500, which that is certainly, that is a, $500 is a real amount of dollars, especially outside of the more relatively affluent academic sphere in the global north. However, these predatory prices are less than most fully open access publishers, publishers like journals like PLOS One or publishers like MDPI, where we tend to see fees more in the $2,000 to $2,500 range. Open access journals from some of the big 5 traditional legitimate publishers tend to be a little bit more expensive, tend to be on the high end of the average range. And interestingly enough, Grand Valley actually stopped covering hybrid open access a number of years ago, because when we looked at our data, we were finding that hybrid open access fees, so these are fees for article-based open access in a subscription-based journal, a journal that is already supported by subscription revenues, those were the highest fees that we were seeing, like across the board. So the journals that had other means of financial support were charging us more, which really suggested that, at least in some cases, open access fees for the large, well-established traditional publishers function more as an additional revenue stream than a transition pathway. And I think this is really well illustrated by the fee for hybrid open access, so open access for a single article in Cell, which is almost $12,000. And there are open access book publishers that will charge less than $10,000 to publish an open access book, including peer review, including copy editing and formatting. Beyond APCs, we've got page and color fees, which made sense 50 years ago. Because colored ink is more expensive, more pages in print is more expensive. But we're still seeing these with digital journals, or with articles that are in digital and paper. Authors get the fee regardless of how many copies of print versus how many people will be accessing it online. And then something that I'm increasingly familiar with in my new role as head of collections, subscription pricing. One of my first exciting renewal decisions was a publisher that decided that really the appropriate price increase for us to renew access to their product was 18%. They're able to do that because they're one of a very small number of publishers that provide access to this kind of content. Westlaw decided to hike our prices by 18%. I don't know why I thought I needed to protect them. We don't really have any other good options for the legal information that we had from that subscription. But it's not an open access journal, so we don't talk about that as predatory. And then, of course, when we're talking about subscription publishers, we get to talk about profit margins. I honestly don't think Elsevier is the most exploitative publisher, but they're the one that gets an awful lot of attention when they announce their annual operating profit margins, because it's usually somewhere around 30%. And that is a profit margin. That 30% is money that is not needed to cover the costs of producing their content, that is being taken out of higher education, of academia, and is going to the broader relics or relks, or however you want to pronounce it, corporation. And then if we're talking about exploitation, sometimes we're talking about exploiting authors, misleading them or confusing them. And yes, there are scam journals that confuse authors, or that pretend to be better than they are, something other than they are. But they're not the only sources of confusion that authors are facing. As you will know if you've had to look for the reuse or self-archiving terms on almost any publisher's website. For those of us who work in Scholcom, who understand what terms like post-print and preprint, what those terms are, it's sometimes hard for us to find information that actually clarifies what an author can do with their article. And if that's not misleading, I don't know what is. We're starting to see more publishers including in their author agreements the right to or permission to share your work for training AI, or in building AI models, because who doesn't love burning down a chunk of forest to ask fancy autocorrect how to resolve a particular question. I don't have opinions about AI at all. And then finally, very common, the traditional scholarly publishing model, where authors transfer all of their copyright over to a journal, very frequently limits authors' reuse of materials. Every couple of years, I'll have a conversation with faculty, usually in our health sciences and nursing programs, who are building on work that they've previously done and find it very frustrating that they need to pay the Copyright Clearance Center in order to reuse a graphic that they themselves created for a previous article. But that's normal. That's legitimate publishing. That's not predatory. Next slide. The other big area of criticism or concern around predatory publishing is the idea that predatory publishing is about poor quality control, producing more and worse scholarly information. And again, this is something that this is a kind of problem. This is a critique. This is an issue in this production of academic knowledge that extends far beyond whatever subset of journals we're thinking about as predatory. For a long time, one of the critiques of predatory open access journals was that they promised a very quick and unrealistically quick turnaround for peer review. And now we're seeing the big commercial publishers start to offer expedited peer review for a fee. But if you pay your rapid peer review fee, you'll get a response in 2 weeks rather than 2 to 8 months. Discussions of predatory publishing worry about the possibility of journals that will just publish anything and everything. That's a lot of the sting operations that have exposed the prevalence of predatory journals have been some variation of generate a nonsense paper, submit it to a bunch of different journals, see how many of them reject it outright or don't respond, or accept it and then ask for payment. Interestingly enough, those scams pretty much always look at open access journals and do not send their scam articles to commercial journals, which, you would think if it was going to be an experiment, you'd want a control group to compare. But If it's a problem that a publisher or a journal is willing to publish everything, what do we call the practice of cascading review, where a journal from a major publisher, from a traditional, legitimate Big Five publisher, reviews your submission, says, nope, this doesn't meet our standards, but have you considered submitting it to our sister journal that is just a step down in terms of how rigorous they expect the research to be? Here, let's just cascade this article down to them. It's not that we're not going to publish it. We just won't publish it in this particular box. But we're happy to publish it, especially if publishing it lets us make some more money. And then if we look at publisher pressure for to produce more articles, yes, if a journal is charging authors on acceptance of their article, there is a financial incentive for them to produce more articles. That also applies to commercial publishers. If there's an opportunity for them to create a new journal for a niche field, rather than expand the scope of an existing journal, there's a financial incentive there. If anyone follows the Retraction Watch blog, which I highly recommend, you'll periodically see news about editorial boards either kind of making open letters of complaint or in some cases walking out en masse because of concerns about publisher pressure to lower their standards or increase their output. The most recent that Retraction Watch covered was last year, the Journal of Clinical Immunology. The entire editorial board walked out after Springer allegedly tried to get the journal to increase their output, to publish more articles so that they could be bringing in more revenue to Springer. The other piece of quality control is, the potential harm of poor quality science, poor quality research, or outright fraud. There are incentives and rewards for this far beyond the traditional predatory open access journal sphere. In 2013, a scholar named Bjorn Brems did a study looking at impact factor in neuroscience journals and comparing that to retraction rates, and found a very interesting positive correlation. So the higher the impact factor, the higher retraction rate. It's not necessarily that impact factors cause a higher retraction rate, but if you've got a journal that is evaluating submissions based on how exciting they are, and that journal is very prestigious, and there's a strong incentive for authors to submit to that journal, then there's a strong incentive for those authors to overpromise or exaggerate, consciously or unconsciously, the scope of their findings, because more exciting findings will make them more likely to be published in this very prestigious journal. And the more you overstate your findings, the more you stretch what you've found to sound more exciting, the more likely it is that further study will reveal, oops, that wasn't quite correct. Similarly, and again, I would point people to Retraction Watch. There's periodically news about peer review rings being uncovered. Groups of peer reviewers who coordinate to support each other's work. Paper mills that are just kind of churning out kind of lowest common denominator quality work and selling the rights to stick your name on that work. Subscription journals are just as vulnerable as open access journals. New publishers are just as vulnerable to that as large, well-established publishers. And then finally, I don't like to talk about the predatory risks of poor quality publication without mentioning what I think is the single most damaging piece of fraudulent research that's come out in my lifetime. And that's the infamous study by the fraudster Andrew Wakefield in The Lancet. This is a malicious piece of work that has contributed directly and actively to the anti-immunization movement, to the anti-vaxxer movement, with very real public health consequences. A couple months ago, measles outbreaks were in the news because of anti-vaxxers. And a lot of that, and Wakefield isn't the only person who's produced phony research suggesting a link between vaccines and insert whatever negative health outcome you want. But if the Lancet can retain its reputation after publishing such a damaging piece of fraudulent work, why are we suggesting that open access journals are somehow worse if fraudulent work gets past their peer review? And then finally, the other piece, or the kind of final way that I see predatory talked about, is the idea that predatory publishing is new and scary. Teresa touched on this a little bit. Vanity presses have been around basically as long as there have been presses. The way that scam journal websites present themselves as legitimate has an awful lot of parallels with the way that an email from your bank at scam.com presents itself as legitimately a message from your bank. And the aggressive solicitation that you sometimes see with people talk about with predatory journals, the widespread aggressive kind of cold emailing, hey, author name, we would love to publish your work in this journal. That has an awful lot of parallels with every other kind of email marketing. So that complicates the idea of predatory. There are a couple more complications I want to introduce. First, lists, watch lists and safe lists. And again, this is going to repeat a little bit from what Teresa was saying. Lists are a fundamentally, inherently limited tool. Depending on what the list actually is measuring, it may not be looking at what an author wants to measure. It may not be measuring quality, however we define quality. Maybe it's looking at transparency and visible publishing practices. DOAJ does this. They don't make a determination on the quality of research that a journal provides. They say, all right, this journal has clearly communicated how they operate, and they seem to be operating in the way that they say they operate. It's also the question of, are you looking at the content of a journal, or are you looking at its aesthetics? This is especially relevant for publications from outside the Anglophone world. So if English is not your first language, you're going to have more of a challenge communicating, especially in a scientific scholarly vernacular, because English is a terrible and confusing language. More exceptions than rules, and many of the exceptions have exceptions. Lists also, as the quote Maria shared indicate, create a binary that doesn't really reflect the messy reality, and any kind of list, a watch list, a safe list, is going to be outpaced by the rate of new, potentially scam, potentially legitimate journals that are being created. So a list is always going to be incomplete. Lists also carry bias because they are tools created by humans, and humans carry bias. Some of that bias comes in just simply who is scrutinized, who is being evaluated by the list. Or who is being tested by the sting operation. Are we looking at open access only, or are we looking at subscription publishers? Are we only looking at new publishers? Are we judging the publisher, or are we judging the journals? Are we looking at journals that charge a fee, or are we looking at all journals? And then the practices that are privileged can be another source of bias. Whether that's the language and the terminology that's used, or the just the general vibe of a journal, the layout, the aesthetics. it's another case of like we are bringing bias about the package that information is contained in, not the information itself. Next slide. So if we're going to talk about bias, I need to do a quick rant about Jeffrey Beal. As Teresa noted, Jeffrey Beal was really the first librarian to get a lot of attention for raising the alarm about predatory publishing. His list, which disappeared, which was taken down in 2017, presented itself as was allegedly a list of potentially problematic or predatory publishers, but was widely treated as an authoritative, definitive list of bad publishers. Beal's criteria were opaque. There was not really an appeals process for a journal or a publisher to say, hey, we think we're on here by mistake. Can you please look more closely? It only targeted open access journals and open access publishers. All of the journals that a publisher produced would be tarred with the same brush, which, if that standard was applied to the big five publishers, all of them have had some sort of misstep or error. So all of them are predatory. Beal's list also increasingly demonstrated, Beal's list and Beal's writings also increasingly demonstrated his bias and criticism of the open access movement as an idea in general. By the time he eventually took his list down, his editorials and commentaries presented him as a crusader for the truth against a conspiracy of anti-corporatist interests, hoping to financially exploit higher education and academia. He also demonstrated increasingly open criticisms or biases against scholarly work produced outside of the global north. Most notably in 2015, he had published a piece. And again, most of his work was op-eds and commentary, not evidence-based research, referring to South and Latin American journals as a publication favela, kind of basically saying, well, if the journal isn't from Europe or North America, then it's just bad. It's just a slum. Beal is bad. Many of the lists that you can find on the internet are still based on his original premises or are attempting to continue his project. So be wary of that. All right, I've been talking a long time. So quality, again, the idea of quality is messy. The metrics that we use to measure, or that academics use to measure or as shortcuts for quality, often don't measure quality. The impact factor was designed to help librarians buy print journal volumes to stick on our shelves. Citation counts give the same weight to a terrible article that is cited because everyone is refuting it, and an amazing article that is cited because everyone is building on it. Rigor and impact and novelty are defined differently and understood differently, depending on the journal, depending on the discipline. Fundamentally, quality is subjective. It is individual. It depends on an individual's context. A brand new tenure track faculty member fighting for a spot at an Ivy League institution has different priorities for where they publish than a near retirement faculty member who just wants to get this last project out there in the world so they can move off to retirement and hang out on a beach sipping their favorite drinks. Disciplinary norms differ in terms of what makes good research, what is reliable and solid research. And then aesthetics don't equal content. I've encountered perfectly legitimate small society journals that are run by one or two people whose sense of journal design is stuck in 1999 with GeoCities. There are some scam journals that have very polished looking websites. So ultimately, our critique of predatory publishing is that lists are not the right tool for this problem. The problem of predatory publishing is an information literacy problem. Lists are a shortcut. They're an appealing shortcut, but I don't think they're a necessary one. And I don't think they're a sufficient tool. Academics, probably more than any other group in society, are well positioned to address the problem of predatory publishing, because what is scholarship except critical thinking? That is what scholars are trained for, and maybe they haven't applied those skills to thinking about publishing practices, but librarians have. That is our discipline. That brings us to Teresa.
Should unmute myself first, huh? All right, thank you so much. So, okay, we've tried to kind of lay out how we view the problem of predatory publishing. And so how do you go about navigating it? Because we don't want to deny that predatory practices exist. We just think it's probably much broader than how it's usually defined. And so we do kind of want to provide what help we can, although I know we were kind of joking earlier, oh yeah, sure, we have all the solutions. No, of course we don't have all the solutions. It's a very tough problem. But hopefully we can, I don't know, make a dent. So I guess our approach that, how Matt and I approach this both just generally in our own work, but also with our JAGR reviews, the journal reviews, which we will talk about. We really want to focus on demystifying and reducing fear for our researchers. There is what I would call a lot of fear mongering around predatory publishing. Honestly, I kind of think it's almost just like a way to get an easy publication, because I see so many editorials and letters and things like that. And I'm just like, are you just trying to pad your stats? Which is maybe mean to me, sorry. So we want to kind of like calm things down a little bit. We want to keep it evidence-based. We want to get away from binary decisions when we think, as Matt said, it's very much up to your individual situation. But we also want to affirm our expertise as librarians. This is something that I get asked to do a lot. I have a lot of expertise and knowledge about how scholarly communication works. Matt does. I'm sure a lot of you guys here attending this webinar do as well. But we also want to remind our researchers, they have expertise as well as in the content, right? And they can do evaluation. So how can we approach this if we still want to avoid the list, though, as we've kind of laid out a number of critiques against this idea of using safe lists and watch lists? So first of all, yes, I do actually recommend DOAJ as a tool when used correctly. Again, I really want to stress DOAJ was not created to be an arbiter of quality, but I still think DOAJ is an amazing resource. I love them. I use them myself when searching for journals to publish in. And yes, it means that DOAJ is for open access journals. You won't find hybrid journals or paywall journals in there. And so it shouldn't be the only resource, because again, this is not just about open access journals, but certainly we want to gather information on OA journals. And if a journal is in DOAJ, it's a great resource to go out and find information on that journal. It's a very nice, easy way to gather information. But I do also want to stress that just because a journal is not in DOAJ does not mean it is any way an unlegitimate journal or a poor quality journal. There's lots of legitimate reasons that journals don't join DOAJ. Some of them are just too new. You won't find RJJR in DOAJ because we know we're too new. We haven't even tried to get in there yet. Other journals, they're just small. They don't have the resources. It can be a bit intensive to get into a DOAJ. So just because an open access journal is not in there does not mean it's bad, but it's a good place to get information. We are also really big fans of the Committee on Publication Ethics. Hopefully most of you all are familiar with it, but if you're not, COPE is how we commonly refer to it. Any publisher can be a member of COPE. It's almost kind of like they sometimes act as like a mediator if there's disputes between a publisher and another entity. But they also release a lot of guidelines on best practices for scholarly publishing. And if you go back to that quote I had at the very beginning about what is predatory publishing, one of the elements they included was, do they follow best practices and for scholarly publishing? But if we don't have some kind of agreed on standard that's not just being determined by the for-profit publishers of what those best practices are, it's really hard. And so we see COPE as a really good resource for that. Are they following the various best practices that COPE has set out? Certainly checking indexes. I kind of find that I don't see as many publishers and journals listing, claiming to be like falsely indexed somewhere when they're really not indexed there. What I'm seeing more of these days is claiming to be indexed in something that's not really an index. So like I very much see journals say, we're indexed by Google Scholar. I'm like, well, it's not an index. They're just crawling websites. That's all they're doing. It's not the same thing. We also are really big fans of Think, Check, Submit. We love the idea of, really pushing qualitative, contextual thinking, and we think Check, Submit does that. The one problem, though, that I think about Think, Check, Submit is it's asking researchers to take the time to go out and investigate a journal on their own, right? And I know a lot of my scholars are very, very busy with many things, and they just don't care, and they don't have the time. And that's why they tend to gravitate towards the list. So that's why our final recommendation, this is a little bit of self-publishing or promotion here, is RJJR. Oh, but wait, what's that? We've already talked about it, so hopefully you know now. It stands for Reviews, the Journal of Journal Reviews. And maybe the easiest way I can explain the concept of our journal is we took the idea of Think, Check, Submit and put it on steroids. We took it to the next level, if you will. And so basically, we are a scholarly peer-reviewed journal that publishes journal reviews of other scholarly journals that have gone through that kind of qualitative contextual evidence gathering that you would have done with Think, Check, Submit, and then you just wrote it up and you submitted it to us and we peer reviewed it and we'll publish it. Kind of the whole point of this is we understand scholars don't have a lot of time. They want to quickly make a decision. So we thought we would take the work that librarians often are already doing, and sometimes other people as well, and then if you turn it into a more formalized process, if you present the evidence, we can peer review the evidence, and then we can publish it in succinct 2,000 or less, or less words, in a succinct peer review report. Scholars can then quickly read those reports, find the evidence about journals, and then come to a decision themselves. That's really important to us. We do also want to practice and reflect transparent practices in scholarly publishing. So we do also publish open peer reviews along with our reviews of journals. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say reviews so many times, and I'll try and be clear about which type of review I'm talking about. So we do publish anonymous open peer reviews. And then also because we do believe that scholarly communications is always evolving, we do allow publishers to publish responses. We do have a lot of parameters about how these responses works. It's really only if they can present evidence to show they've updated or changed or something in some way. So as far as reviews work, we created a rubric, and this was very heavily influenced by COPE, DOAJ, Think, Check, Submit, other groups like that. I would say our rubric is probably, it's definitely more involved than the rubric you see with Think, Check, Submit. We've added some other criteria to it. Essentially, you can write up a review, and if you're interested in writing a review for our journal, please do so. We would love to it. We also see our review, it is openly licensed. And so we see our review as something, our rubric is something that anyone can use for their own situation. And so if you're just a librarian who's not really sure how to evaluate journals and you would like some guiding questions to help you, we think our rubric can really help with that. And we want to stress the rubric was made for all journals, not just open access journals. So our general areas of our rubric, we do have transparency of practice. This is a lot of the general kind of stuff. Do they talk about how they do peer review? Do they do peer review? Do they require you to transfer your copyright? Is there an APC? If so, how much is it? When is it expected you pay? Just things like that. Then there's the journal behavior. So if there's actually if there's public evidence about how a journal has behaved a certain way, you can consider that as well. If you have your own knowledge, that's something you can consider too. Certainly we're interested in the people connected to the journal, especially the editorial board, if it claims to be an international journal, but the editors all come from one region or country, is that really international? Things to consider. We do have a section for equity policies and practices. So what do journals say about, do they have an equity, diversity, inclusion policy? We understand that may be changing in the current environment, but this also includes, is the journal, do they make their accessibility practices known and transparent? And I kind of expecting to see more journals talk about accessibility in light of some court rulings here in the United States. And then also, we don't really expect a lot of these people to be content experts, but still, by looking at some articles from the journal, what can you tell about the content? Do the article topics seem to fit the scope of the journal? Things like that. And then just finally, guiding questions about the background of the journal. How long has it been around? How often is it published? Things like that. Who publishes it, or is it just volunteers who publish it? And so you can actually see our full rubric on our website, which we can link to, and there's a link in the slides as well. We do provide general guidance.
It's a quick,
I'm sorry.
Quick interruption. It seems this call has crashed our site, so don't
Oh!
refresh this page.
Okay.
And folks, if the link isn't working for you, that is correct. It isn't working for anyone right now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Texas Digital Library, they're our host. Thank you very much. But this is what the rubric looks like in full. It is on our website, but it's also in the Texas Digital, is it in the Texas State University repository, I believe. There is another version of it that we can probably link to as well. But this is what the rubric looks like in full. I'm trying to keep it short. I don't want to go too much longer. Generally speaking, if you are interested in using the rubric, our biggest thing is focus on the evidence. We are not trying, like if you were to actually wanting to write up a review for us, we're not looking for like your final opinion on a journal. We just want a summary of the evidence. That's really what we're looking for. And we also understand that not all rubric sections will be applicable to all journals. So use this as a guideline, I guess, to help direct a journal evaluation. If you're just interested for long-term goals for the journal, again, we are very interested in peer-reviewed evidence-based summaries to help scholars make their own decisions. We're not trying to make any determinations about journals. We just want to bring the evidence in a place where they can quickly read it and then come to their own decision. We want to model the contextual critical evaluation ourselves, so we try to practice what we preach. Again, that also means we do try to be a very transparent journal. If there's something you think we're not being transparent about, please let us know. And again, another big thing we wanted to do was give credit to the people already doing this work. I know often before the journal, I would get an email from a professor saying, hey, what about this journal? I would go through, look up all the evidence, write up an email, send it to the professor, and that was it. It was lost in the other. No one else ever got a benefit from it. But we're hoping by this way, librarians can get public credit. It can be reused by others, and they get, especially if peer review is something that matters for their institution, they get that credit as well. And again, provide an iterative forum that reflects scholarship changes, publishing practices changes. Maybe a journal didn't have many policies on their website and then they put it up, and now we want to update our reviews because of that. So that is about everything we have, I think, and we can go to questions now.
Wow, thank you so much. So much to think about. I'm sure everybody else is feeling the same. And we will be open for questions. I just want to, don't tell our other sessions, but it was the best chat ever. The chat is so full of resources that people are sharing. And the chat is also full of examples of how this work comes out in practice, both challenges people are facing and some of the ways in which they're choosing to address it. So audience chat participants, you're awesome. I hope that there'll be some way of sharing some of these. I'll talk to our host about that. So you can, well, the recording will be available so you can see some of these resources. I now have dozens of tabs open because I was clicking things like save this, save this. So lots of resources, lots of examples of this affecting the daily work life of our participants and some of the strategies that they use to address those. And my favorite examples of outrageous APCs. I always like having some of those in my pocket to share with my students when I say, like, APCs can create inequity. And they say, what do you mean? It's like, well, how about this one? What did I see in there? $11,400 for one of them. But that's enough for me. And my co-conspirators, Josh and Will, are going to help me sort of manage the discussion because we've got Q&A, we've got chat, and and people are welcome to raise their hands, take the mic. What would you all like to know? Yeah, Dick says the chat will not be shared publicly. Yes, of course, you want to be able to be candid. Maybe we can find some way of harvesting out some of the resources that were called out in the chat.
There
People
is,
are being-
Simone asked a question in the Q&A about how we're all navigating the MDPI program, which I think it provides a nominal discount on MDPI APCs. And Matt provided an answer, which is that Grand Valley State isn't a part of that program. I can say that if you went and looked at the University of Kansas's OA agreements and APC discounts page, you would find that one listed there. I'm not the owner of those decisions per se, but I've been not exactly challenged about it once, but asked about that by someone who was sort of questioning some of MDPI's practices. And the response that I gave is that there are authors that are there are institutional authors that are publishing in MDPI journals, and so for better or worse, we're taking kind of a neutral stance there. That program doesn't cost us anything. It is an APC discount, so that's the page that it would live on. So we're sort of again, I like Teresa, what you were saying towards the end about really empowering researchers to exercise agency is the complex and not, not immediately accomplishable answer. But I think that's the way. Sorry if there's a loud banging. There's some work being done in my house. But that's an example of that where we are sort of like, we're not making a decision for folks that MDPI is good or bad. We are letting them decide for themselves. I am very lukewarm, is even overstating it on the value of APC discounts. I don't think they really move the dial for anyone. But like my personal feelings about that aren't as relevant as like institutional stance. So that's my input. Others feel free to chime in the chat or unmute and speak.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's-
I'd echo.
Oh,
Please.
sorry.
Go for it, Teresa.
We don't have MDPI. We haven't really signed up for it here, but I also should note at UNR, we don't have an APC fund. We don't help authors pay open access fee. And we have been very hesitant about transformative agreements. We have 3 agreements, but it's kind of like those ones where it really didn't increase prices for us. It was with smaller publishers. I can tell you on campus, MDPI, I mean, it's actually seen as a good publisher to be with, especially with their higher impact journals. Most of our faculty don't seem to have a problem with it. I have heard concerns about peer review turnaround times, but then I would also note that I just got asked to do a 2-week turnaround peer review for one of the big 5 publishers, one of their journals. So again, stuff we see in the big publishers as well.
Yeah, and
Got a couple questions
for
in the
our-
chat. Oh, you want to keep on with this
no,
one?
go ahead.
I just don't want to lose track because the chat is busy. I'll just give you both and you can choose which you would like to respond to. One asks, this is Helene or Helene, I'm sorry if I don't know how to pronounce your name. How are you addressing the pressure on faculty and grad students to publish as a driver for junk publishing? And there's another question asking whether your journal has considered crowdsourced open peer reviews. And they've seen it in another journal and says it's quite illuminating.
We have not considered crowdsource open peer reviews. I can tell you that. It's an interesting concept, one we could certainly explore. I'm not against it.
I think with the first question about like the pressure to publish, I think from my perspective as until very recently our ScholComm person, well, I guess technically I'm still wearing that hat until we finish hiring someone. I think one of the best ways to handle that is to really talk about that problem in all of its complexity. Like this, that not limiting that conversation, the pressure to publish to open access journals, to new or unfamiliar journals, and also, at least at Grand Valley, one of the questions I like to ask faculty if I'm having a conversation with them about predatory publishing or over-publishing is, what do your unit's tenure and promotion guidelines say? Because one of the core characteristics of faculty status in academia is that we are shaping our own evaluation criteria. We are shaping our own incentives. Disciplines, like we're shaping it through our disciplines, we're shaping it through our institutions, but we as scholars have a role. And so if pressure to publish, pressure to reward quantity over quality, if that's a concern, and I would say it should be, then the first place to start is what is our institution asking people to create? How much output are we asking them to shove out there? What do our disciplinary associations say about this? Should our disciplinary associations be saying, hey, stop publishing so much, focus on smaller numbers of better quality, however you want to define that, works? Those are places that change in any of these systems is slow because academia is built out of committees and made for inertia. But that change is largely within our scope, like our collective scope as scholars, or your scope as scholars, if I'm talking to faculty who are concerned about it.
One just little practical thing that we've done here that has helped. So we, I don't know, like back in 2018, we call it the Manuscript Accepted Symposium. And it was the idea that getting people to attend one-off workshops was tough. So we're like, let's just take all our workshops and put it into like one big special day. But part of what we do with Manuscript Accepted, we offer workshops, panels about how to get published for grad students. But probably our most popular thing we do is we always have a panel of university faculty who have served as journal editors. And it is just entirely a Q&A panel. We seed it with some questions that we know are always popular, but we almost never go through all of our questions because usually the audience has so many questions. And we found our students have really appreciated that chance to ask professors who have actually served as journal editors. And it's been a good way for them to kind of demystify it.
Oh, thank you. So I wanted to call out, there was a question in the Q&A about resources for predatory conferences. And Sylvia shared Think Check Attend, sort of the cousin of Think Check Submit. Karen shared a LibGuide that's great as well. So I wanted to just point to those resources. If you have others to share, I'm sure those would be welcome. But there's also a really good question about peer review practices for your journal. And are you looking for peer reviewers? So you may have found an excited volunteer.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Always, if you go to our website when it's working, and if you create an account, there will be a question asking, are you interested in being a peer reviewer? So that's how you can let us know if you would like to peer review. And basically the way open peer review works with RJJR, we do recognize that a fully open peer review could hinder some people who maybe, like fear, they don't want to be, they might limit what they say. So the way we do open peer review at RJJR is we will publish the peer review reports, but they will be anonymous. We don't say who published them. So that's kind of where we've landed on the open peer review contingent, because it is quite a contingent, honestly. But the authors know who the peer reviewers are, and the peer reviewers know who the author is too, or authors are.
And the peer review process itself, so with our reviews, we ask people to provide evidence of, in some way, of the claims that they're making. Usually this is going to be by using the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, like save a snapshot of the page, the web page that you see the positive or concerning or questionable information on. And so one of the big things that we ask our peer reviewers to do is just like, does the review, like can you see the connection between the evidence and the assertions that are made in the review? You know, everyone, like someone's eventual decision about whether to publish in a particular journal, like that is extremely individual. But if I say this journal doesn't list its open access fees, and you can find them on the website, then that is a simple example of what we're like really hope the peer review can focus on.
And I just want to note, and we'll look for more questions, that when you write up the session for your annual report or annual review, make sure you mentioned that the audience was so excited that they crashed the journal server. That's inspiring.
That's
I
Good to
did
know
see
they're
I did see
interested.
one question earlier from Dee Dee Dawson asking if we thought about reviews at the publisher level instead of the journal level. And it's probably come up in our conversations.
It
It is
has. No,
not
I
something
remember
that
this
we would,
conversation.
yeah, like it's not something we are particularly interested in doing because the editorial board of a journal plays so much of a role in the things that that journal does. That that yes, it is definitely possible that a very good publisher will provide equivalent support to all of their journals, and that'll be good. A very problematic publisher will fail to provide support or will provide undue pressure. But kind of going along with the like quality is subjective, one of the like rhetorical points that we're trying to make with this project is that judging a journal by its publisher is it is the same kind of problematic as judging a scholar's work by the journal that they're published in. You're judging the container or the broader structure more than the journal.
I think there were also some logistical concerns about how hard it would be to do a short, succinct evaluation of a whole entire publisher. We did discuss it when we were creating the rubric. There was definitely discussion around it, but I think there was just concerns about how would it even work. So it's something like I could see like it's worthwhile to have evidence of both the publisher and the journal, but there were logistical concerns too.
Oh, this is another interesting question. A good one from Caroline. We haven't run into this before, but would we reject an article, and I assume, please correct in the chat or in the Q&A if I'm interpreting this wrong, a review in RJJR that was where the article was critically peer reviewed. Like our peer reviewer said, there are a lot of problems with this review. I think we would be much more likely to encourage a revise and resubmit of the review. If the open peer review was very critical, then I think we probably would reject if there wasn't interest in revising and resubmitting.
If it's not, if they don't have the evidence or they're leaving out evidence, that would obviously be a really big worry to us. So far, all the reviews have been submitted to us have really done a great job of doing what we asked of them. And that hasn't been an issue. We were actually asked, would we run a review of ourselves? And when we had literally just launched when they asked us, and one of our rules is that a journal has to have been operating for at least a year, just because there needs to be something to evaluate. So we said no at the time, but we've now been up and running for more than a year. So if someone wanted to review us, they could review us too. But yeah, basically, as long as you're providing evidence of a journal and it's following our, like all of our parameters and everything, yeah, I think our scope is very well clearly defined. I would say that.
I really quickly happy to go to the half-hour mark, so about another 10 minutes with conversation. But while I still have the majority of you here, there will be a survey that will auto-populate when you sign out of this. Nick and Spark are facilitating that, but we share the comments. Well, for one thing, we look at the comments as a way to improve and consider future topics and so on. So please provide supportive critical comments, like totally fair. The other thing is that we'll share that with Matt and with Teresa, and like so many of you said kind things in the chat and in the Q&A. So like those comments may be useful to them in their own like annual reviews or annual evals and things like that. So please consider submitting whatever comments you have, but that includes supportive comments, because if this has been useful to you, it's helpful for us and them to know that.
But Teresa, I should spend more time with your journal, and I will, I promise. But I'm curious if you're seeing patterns emerge in terms of what people choose to review. Are there disciplinary patterns
Oh, yes.
or geographic ones, or yeah, what do you see?
US LIS open access.
Okay.
People are reviewing what they know. We would very much love reviews of paywall journals too, because again, this it's for all journals. It's not just for open access journals. We want to really clarify that. We really invite reviews of newer journals too. We're seeing those. We would love to see established journals review. We would love to see non-US, non-LIS journals would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's that goes along with the some of the broader goals of the project. Take science, for example. Probably you're not going to have many people looking for a resource to help them decide whether or not science is a good journal to publish in. However, having a thoughtful review of science using the same kind of rubric and the same approach and looking for the same information, one, it might tell us some interesting things about how transparent, and I'm picking on science for no particular reason. Like could reveal some interesting things about how transparent or clear some of their information is, but it's also a really good example of how the same approach can show up in a lot of you can take the same approach to any unfamiliar journal. It isn't about open access journals. It isn't about journals that charge you a fee. It is like, as Teresa said, we want to demystify this and show people that like the critical thinking skills that scholars are honing all the time as their scholarship are the same skills that they can use to evaluate an unfamiliar journal. There's not some secret library mystery with journal quality. I mean, we've got all of our other secret library mysteries, but there isn't one with like evaluating journal quality that is, restricted only to librarians.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, because I like making work for other people, of course, that some of our subject specialists out there, and I know there are a few of you there in the audience, could pull
Please
together.
make work for us.
They could pull together a really good sort of cluster of reviews around a medical librarian. I think I saw a couple of our medical librarian friends were here anyway. You might say like, here's a group. I don't know if you would want to publish those as one review or a series of reviews. But
we would love to see more liaison librarians, subject librarians be involved in this. ScholarComm librarians do a lot of the work, but it's a lot to ask of all the ScholarComm librarians. And we do think that subject librarians have a lot of knowledge they can bring as well. They might not be as quite familiar with it, but we think they could definitely add a lot.
Yeah, so some of you should volunteer. What else? What else would you all like to know? Or do you have opinions to offer? It doesn't have to be a question. We're happy to hear some opinions too.
I will really quickly, there's a comment or in the Q&A, someone suggested a session on paper mills, and that's an interesting, we'll think interesting when we'll think about that. If you have ideas for topics, it's very helpful to also suggest potential speakers for them. Like if you're like, I'd love to hear about this thing, and this is the person or people that I think of as being experts on that thing, that's also really helpful. Matt, I think you were about to wind up.
Oh, yeah. Just one thought, like that didn't really come up in the discussion, but I think whether it's mutterings or active concern or occasional concern, I think concern about predatory journals is such a as a Scholarcom librarian, it is such a rich opportunity to have a more to introduce a more complex, more nuanced conversation about the whole scope of scholarly publishing, the place of open access within that. I've had a couple of conversations that started out with a talk with the topic of predatory publishing that moved to measures of quality, that moved to journal impact factor, that resulted in folks who are very used to like rigorous contested metrics for things being quite surprised at the origin and purpose of the journal impact factor that they had been treating as a measure of quality, and like, oh, it was a measure of how important it is to have this print journal on the shelf, because when this measure was created, citation tracking had to be done manually going through, going from one citation to another in print journals. This is the wrong tool. Yes, you can hammer in a nail with a wrench, but maybe there's a better tool for hammering in the nail. Like that. The predatory publishing conversation can be a great way to spread expertise, kind of reduce fear and anxiety, reinforce the library as a source of expertise and knowledge, because our disciplinary expertise is comparing information objects. That is what librarians do. So yeah, talking about predatory publishing is great, or it can be great.
Yeah, I had a thought when I think Matt, you were responding to the question about how we're engaging with the pressure to publish. And I don't think we can effectively impact that except to educate early career researchers on the system that they're entering into, and if they want careers in the academy, have to participate in, just to participate in it in a knowledgeable way in which they consider, where they're coming from, what their goals are, what practices they are participating in, or sort of complicit with, and like acknowledging our own, what the practices we're complicit with, and just sort of like help them understand that it is complicated and deserves some scrutiny and some sort of like self-reflection. So like, where do I fit into this, and where would I like to see it go? For more senior researchers, it's like, you don't have to submit to those journals, maybe. Like, you get to choose where you review, who you provide editorial service to, and things like that. Because I think, Matt, you just said something a moment ago, which is like, this doesn't change quickly. Like, this is cultural change is hard and it takes time. And so like we could peck away at the number of people in the academy who are coming in with more knowledge. And unfortunately, I think that's maybe the best we could do as far as addressing a systemic problem that has developed over decades, that like, libraries have participated in, and to some extent, but the publisher parish is just like a huge problem. I don't know how we address that other than educating people in where they fit in that system and where they can have an influence on it.
We're getting very near to the end of time. I want to make sure that people have eyes on the chat to be reminded that we have another session on June 4th on authors' rights. And will be our gracious host for that one, or at least do as much work as I've done for this one. And I'm sure you will all join me in thanking Matt and Teresa. It was fabulous. But I want to also offer them last words. Are you last words kind of people? Is there anything you want to get in?
Don't use Beale's list for research methodology, please. I see it so much, and I've seen it in LAS literature, and oh, it hurts my soul. Don't do that. That's it.
Very strongly second that. Also, please do make more work for us. We would love to see more submissions, more peer reviewers. Yes. Make us work harder on this. Because currently it's not an enormous inconvenience in either of our lives. And when we get to that point, that'll be like we'll probably have a party if we can find the time to plan one. When we get to this is an unavoidable burden.
We
That'd
want
be
a
a good problem to
problem.
have.
Yeah, good problem.
I wish you good problems.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. We should wind up and let you, get back to work and lives.
Thanks, everybody. We'll
Thank you
see
all.
you on June 4th for the next conversation with Dave Hansen about, about authors' rights and open access.